This conference will now be recorded.
Great. So
All
just
right. Well, we'll call the meeting to order.
all right.
And what do we have next slide?
Public comments.
So are there? Yeah.
So
Okay. Hearing none.
Okay.
Next slide.
We have minutes from the June 9th, 2021 meeting.
Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Brenda. I make a motion to approve.
And a second?
This is Lonnie, I second.
Okay, so is there any discussion, any corrections, modifications, anything?
This is
If
Binu.
not, all those, sure.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't present for the meeting, so I guess I need to abstain.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those disapproving signify by saying no. And abstentions?
I have two, I guess.
Okay. Eric, I guess the next item is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So we're here for our annual recast of budget and targets discussion. And so just for those on the committee that aren't aware, we typically put together our targets and budget starting in April for the upcoming fiscal year and make a recommendation to the board in June. The board then approves the budget and targets. The fiscal year kicks off in July. We have a good 5.5 months of activity, and then we come back and we check in and say, hey, what are we really going to be able to achieve this year? Are these targets in line with what we expect? And are there additional resources that we need to achieve them? So with that, I will kick off and I'll go through sector by sector, starting with the incentive programs where we are adjusting targets. So here we're proposing is an increase in targets by about 1,100 projects, an increase in investment by $43 million, and an increase of capacity installed by about 11 megawatts. Don't get too excited. Basically, when we did the original solar targets for RSIP, we weren't thinking holistically about the RSIP program and the RSIP extension, and we didn't, it was a calculation error on our part. So we've adjusted that to be reflective of what's actually going to be achieved. And for the most part, we have achieved that thus far. I do expect there to be some of these projects to fall out a little bit. So I think the ultimate end number come June will be a little less than the 1,700 projects, but it'll be directionally much closer to that than the original target of 471. In terms of battery storage, we are adjusting that target downward. That's just based off of market feedback. As we get ready to launch the Energy Storage Solutions program, actually we are live, start officially on January 3rd, but as we are getting up and running, we are hearing feedback from installers about lead times, about how quickly they're going to be ready to start pushing their wares in the market, shall we say. So while we do have the same target for the overall calendar year that was established by PURA, we're expecting more of that uptake to take place in the second half of the calendar year than in the first half. So we are adjusting that target accordingly. With both SMART-E and with Posigen, we're leaving those targets as is. The Posigen target is pretty much locked in. Again, there may be some attrition from projects not getting completed, but the RCIP is closed. The LMI incentive is part of that. It is completed, and so we're pretty confident with that. And with SMART-E, we're leaving the target at 800 projects for the year. We're over 50% of the way to that target, and we're confident that we are going to exceed that target, achieve or exceed that for the year. Any questions on the incentive business or incentive programs?
I just say this, it's great to have, you know, like that many more projects and that much, you know, clean energy, and presumably that bumped up quite a bit the amount of emissions, you know, taken out of the atmosphere. So I think this is good stuff.
Yes, I mean, just looking at the emissions numbers, that 44,000 tons is triple, or sorry, it's just shy of triple the original target of 15,000. So we certainly will have some impact there.
So what does 44,000 tons mean? Like, do you have an equivalent of like how many cars off the road?
I do. I don't have it in front of me, but if you give me 2 seconds, I will. I will translate that for you.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be great. We actually are measuring our carbon footprint as an organization, and not nearly as much as an impact as this, but it's actually kind of a good way for everyday folks to kind of understand what that means.
Yeah, we have used the EPA greenhouse gas calculator and equivalencies, which does a great conversion. It was approved as part of our air quality impacts methodology, which we reviewed with EPA and with DEEP. And so, sorry, just pulling this up. This is the equivalent of that is taking about 9,700 passenger vehicles off the road for a year.
That's pretty significant. Thank you.
This is Binu. So this is a happy mistake that happened with the residential solar. So are there any measures taken to prevent this mistake? I mean, I guess we shouldn't prevent such mistakes, but.
Yeah, I think it's just better understanding on all of our parts of what how we've put these together in the past, making sure that we're consistent.
Okay. A question about the battery storage. Is this a supply chain issue the first year?
Some of it is supply chain. We have heard that anecdotally. I think a lot of it is there's readiness in terms of sales outside of that. So we have the installers that are going to need to bring on salespeople to sell batteries. They're needing to put together marketing materials that are inclusive of the Energy Storage Solutions program. We need to make sure that everybody is getting onboarded correctly with the 2 distributed energy resource management systems. So those are the technology platforms that the utilities are going to use to dispatch the batteries, basically say charge now or discharge now. And so that shouldn't be a huge hurdle to cross, being that a lot of these batteries from a technology perspective are interacting with these two platforms in other programs, but it still does take a little bit of a review to make sure that they're up and running. So we expect, I think we're doing everything that we can to facilitate people coming up, but I think that just people getting their businesses ready and out there is going to take a little bit of time.
Okay, thank you.
This is Brian. Maybe just to Banu, just to give you a sense of scale, roughly on an annual basis, in general, in the residential solar market, there's about 60 megawatts of residential solar being deployed. That's probably about 7,500 customers a year. On the non-residential side, there's probably about a similar number, 50 to 60 megawatts a year. Much less number of projects, probably 400 projects, roughly like that a year. The market is in transition. So I think a challenge with our estimation on residential solar is that we're closing down a program, the RCIP, the 350 megawatt target that we had. And then we had an extension that allowed us to navigate through COVID and the transition from net metering to a tariff. So we kind of had hiccups on that. But, battery storage, I think if you asked us, this number could be lower, could be higher, but this is a new market that we're creating the incentive for. Yes, supply chain issues. We'll see how the market does over the course of the next 6 months as we kind of roll it out. But batteries are definitely more technical. It's like you go from efficiency. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a lot of market participants know how to do weatherization and audits. As you go to solar, it gets more technical, and as you go to battery storage, it gets even more technical because you have to dispatch the batteries, store them, and do all these things. So I think the team is being conservative on revising those numbers.
Good. Thank you.
Eric, would we have the ability to say, in terms of the number of projects and stuff, the number of jobs that we anticipate being created or sustained?
We do. I can't run that calculation right now, but I'll follow up with you after this. I just need to pull out. It'll take me a little longer to pull up our job calculator than logging onto the EPA greenhouse gas equivalency website.
It might be helpful for the board to hear that number, though.
Certainly, I'll make sure that that's included in that presentation.
Eric, anything you want to speak to in terms of updating the calculator with Guidehouse and the process we go through with DECD and DRS?
Sure thing. So our jobs methodology in terms of how do we ascribe impact to our programs in terms of the job stimulus is based off of a study that was originally completed by, at that point, Navigant Consulting. I think the original study goes back to 2009. It was updated and refreshed with DECD in 2016. It was expanded in 2017 and through 19 to include tax revenue. And so to get to the tax revenue, we had to look at jobs that were created because we're looking at the tax revenues that come from those jobs as one of the elements of that part of the calculator. We recently engaged Guidehouse, who is Navigant is now part of, to help us update that that calculator. We worked with them to do, I think it was 60-something interviews with industry participants locally in terms of how many jobs get created, what types of those jobs, what are the wages, and basically what we've ended up is this bottom-up approach, refresh of this methodology that we'll be bringing to the ACG committee to review in May. Guidehouse finished the study that it's the same format that we've had in the past. We end up with multipliers based off of the dollar amount of or project costs that lead to the number of jobs created. We still need to work with our partners in government to kick the tires on this. So we're going to be taking this to DECD to look at the jobs portion and make sure that they're comfortable with that. So Banu, I think we plan on reaching out to Nandika, who has worked with us on some of the updates through this so far. So in terms of kind of the induced and indirect jobs that are created for every direct job that are that's created, she's been a part of that calculation. So we'll work through Nandika, and then we will revisit the tax pieces with the Department of Revenue Services to look at corporate and personal income tax that's generated, as well as the sales and use taxes. And then this time we expanded the study to include property tax. So we will be engaging the Office of Policy Management to take a look at our approach to estimating those proceeds from property taxes. So I look forward to sharing with you the final result in May.
Thank you, Eric.
Any other questions on the incentive programs? All right, with that, I will move on to the financing programs. So overall on the financing side, we're revising our targets down from 902 projects down to 679. We're revising downward the investments or the capital deployed from 61 million to 48 million, and our capacity installed from 19.1 to 16.5. And this is reflective of what we expect to close in both our pipelines and the third-party pipelines that are included in this number. I'll now go through each program and what we expect to see the changes coming from. So CPACE, we're going from 44 projects down to 30. This is primarily driven by the third-party CPACE developers, so the capital providers that are bringing us projects, or they're bringing us projects to approve, but it's all of their financing. The capital deployed target for this is coming down just slightly, only by 1 million, and the capacity is going to stay about the same. So I think we're going from 6.5 megawatts to 6.3. Basically, the driver behind this is it's just they are having larger projects, but fewer of them that are going to cross the finish line this year. Our own internal target, I think we're taking one off. We've had a little bit of a slow first half of the year, but I think the second half remains pretty robust, and we remain positive on what we can achieve. Moving on to the Green Bank Solar PPA, we're bringing our target down from 42 projects and 25 million and 13 megawatts of capacity down to 37 projects, $17 million of capital deployed, and 11 megawatts of capacity. This is the vast majority of this are the state solar projects and muni projects. I think we had a couple of the state projects that are taking a little bit more time than we had expected. That's one of the drivers of this change. The other one has been just third-party developed projects are taking a little bit longer. And then we haven't seen as big of an uptake in terms of multifamily PPAs as we had hoped. We do still view this as a strong potential growth area, and we are still working hard to do that development, especially in light of the policy changes at PURA that impact multifamily properties, allowing them to take advantage of better rates. So we are still working on that, but it's just that we don't see those crossing the finish line this year. In terms of SBEA, this is the biggest driver of this decrease in projects for the financing programs. We applied a haircut to the original estimate provided by the utilities for the year when we did the original target, knowing that we viewed their original one as was being very, very optimistic. We applied a haircut. It was not as big of a haircut, and so what we're showing now is in line with what we've seen thus far through the year. So it's just slower uptake. We don't control the marketing for this. We aren't involved in the marketing of it. So we're reflective of just what the utilities are able to close themselves. So if we expect them to continue on the existing trend, this is what we will achieve for the year. Moving down to multifamily, we're adjusting that target down from 4 projects to 2. That's reflective of what's in that pipeline, and we're making that adjustment based off of slower uptake on multifamily PPAs. The health and safety goal, again, we had been hopeful for 1 project or for 2 projects. We think it's going to be 1 project. The capital deployed target, though, is remaining the same. And then you'll see that we still are keeping our emissions impacts for under transportation, and that's reflective of the work that we do with the carbon offsets for EV charging and our aggregation work there. That's continuing. In strategic investments, we have nothing in that, but I'm sure that something will close. There are multiple things in the pipeline. Bert is hard at work as ever. Questions on the financing programs?
Eric, this is John. How much does we thought we were kind of out of the woods with COVID, and now we're into the thick of it again. Will that push some of these target, the results in some of these categories downward?
I'd like to say no. And I think that the adjusted targets are already reflective of the impacts of COVID, just taking into account the lead times that we see and the fact that we've adjusted to reflect the current status of our pipeline. So if you take your typical CPACE project, that's going to take a significant amount of time. We're talking months to go from somebody knocking on somebody's door saying, hey, wouldn't you like to put in a new HVAC system and get it financed through CPACE, to us getting a project that we can approve and then getting something to closing. So I think that the impacts of COVID in terms of what in slowing down that sales process, I think that that's already happened. So I remain positive that we're going to achieve these numbers that we're putting forth today. I mean, I can always be wrong, and there can be further delays caused by COVID, but I'm very hopeful that that won't occur. Other questions or concerns? All right.
I
Well,
have Sorry, Eric. Are there any environmentally related projects on the horizon?
So not yet. So that's a topic we're going to talk about with the budget. But so we had none in our targets, and we are still working on building up the strategy and programmatic offerings for environmental infrastructure. Brian, I don't know if you want to give an overview as to where we are on that.
Yeah, sure. So at a macro level, Brenda, per the statute, we have to have a comprehensive plan in place before we can approach environmental infrastructure. Now, having said that, you know, we're in a process now having conversations with stakeholders on land conservation, parks and recreation. We're now in agriculture. Ashley and I are trying to summarize and wrap up our findings in land conservation and parks and recreation. There was a lot of good feedback from the board in the December meeting, so we're going to touch base with a few board members as well and a few other nonprofits to wrap those up. But we're now venturing into agriculture. But we have, like, for example, had DECD and the Department of Ag approach us on some greenhouse-like projects in agriculture that our colleagues across the border, the New York Green Bank, have supported. So it's likely that through our Green Bank Capital Solutions, we would try to bring a project in and look at it. And, you know, that'll probably take a few months to kind of work through as we continue to better understand what we can do on environmental infrastructure. So all of that is to say, my hope is that in the May-June timeframe, as the B&O committee is taking a look at the strategic plan for the subsequent year, that we'll begin to have the conversation on what we think areas the Green Bank can help support on environmental infrastructure will be. So we'll have a more robust conversation there. And then, of course, our offsite strategic retreat. The Smarty loan on the residential side is probably the easiest area where we can open up the market. You know, I don't want to say immediately, you know, as our teams are still looking at it, but you could imagine, because our local community banks and credit unions do the loans to the residential single family customers, and we provide a guarantee using our balance sheet, that we could open it up for water projects, ag projects, resiliency projects, you know, for homeowners to be able to use local community banks and credit unions to access capital for that. So I think, Eric, in our February deployment committee meeting, we're going to start to have those conversations. You know, here's the first group of projects we think the Smarty loan can be opened up to. So we're kind of steadily, Brenda, like, understanding what we can do. It's a new area for us and our staff, and we're just trying to kind of ease in and understand the opportunities out there.
I appreciate that. I think the timing is great. Yesterday, we convened a meeting with several key players from the Water Planning Council and the Energy Efficiency Board. Ashley was also invited to attend that meeting to start the conversation around the marriage of water efficiency and conservation along with energy efficiency. So I was hoping that one of the potential solutions for residential folks who may need a Smarty loan to address some of their water utility needs or well water conversions to city water hookups is the Green Bank and the Smarty loan. So more to come on that, and I'm hoping that we can coordinate all of these efforts together. So thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, and water is probably one of those areas where it's a simple plug. Simple is probably too strong a word, but it's a plug that can be made into Smarty. You know, the pipes, a well, water quality testing, you know, those sorts of things that can be, you know, supported as residential infrastructure. Yeah, I will make it a point to touch base with Joe on our team to see where in the environmental infrastructure definition we're looking for the February meeting. It might be water, Brenda. broadly. So we'll probably want to lean on you in terms of, are we capturing all the measures that can be done? You know, and obviously we'll be flexible to other water types of measures given the list.
You got it. Thank you.
Other questions on targets before we move to the budget? All right, well, with that, let's move on to the budget. So starting with revenues, our first big adjustment is to increase the amount of forecasted revenue by 3.3 million. And this is similar to the way that we adjust our targets based off of pipeline. We're adjusting our revenues based off of what we're seeing. So thus far, we're predicting an increase in utility customer assessments by 227,000 and an increase in Regi auction proceeds by just over $3 million. The Regi auction increase is due to increased demand and a higher clearing price for those allowances. So this is just bringing that in line with reality. And with that, I'll move on to expenses. So we're proposing an increase in compensation and benefits across the board by 387. I'm sorry, it's a decrease in compensation and benefits by 387,000. This is reflective of the fact that we don't intend to bring on the director of environmental infrastructure that we had originally budgeted for in the last summer until probably the end of the year. I think the original budget had us slated to have somebody starting in January. And as you heard in Brian's update, we're still going through that strategic planning process. So our desire is to have that completed before we put together a job description and go out and find somebody for this role. So that's the primary driver there. There were also a handful of other adjustments in terms of compensation and benefits, specifically in the incentive programs. We reallocated some staff time away from that. We ended up having not filling a position that was open. So that drove a lot of that. We are including $10,000 extra in there to support an EDF Climate Corps fellow. The Environmental Defense Fund runs a program called Climate Corps where they pair graduate students with typically private sector organizations, but more and more they're working with state governments to identify opportunities for energy efficiency or sustainability. I think we have a good project lined up that we're looking to work with Climate Corps on for the summer. So moving on, I'll just pause for a moment and say thematically through this, the big driver of most of the changes in this budget is coming from us having officially been given the Energy Storage Solutions Program to administer by PURA. When we did the original budget and targets, that had not been made official. So we included battery storage in the targets, but we didn't reflect the expenses aside from what we knew that we needed in terms of support prior to that PURA ruling in the original budget. So now, at that time, we said, look, we'll be coming back in January to look for those expenses. And so here we are. So I'll go through the rest of the adjustments that we're looking to make. Starting in program development and administration, we're looking for an additional 125,000. That is primarily to cover the cost of the customer enrollment platform for storage. as well as to cover an increased cost for inspections as we onboard installers. We're replicating the approach that we had with RCIP, where we're not looking to inspect every installation. We're looking to do this in a more efficient and scalable approach, but that requires we do more inspections of installers as they're new. So we're expecting, hey, everybody's new at this, so we're going to be doing more inspections now, and that should decrease over time as people prove themselves to be good actors. Moving on to marketing, we're looking for $325,000 of additional marketing expense. 310 of that is specifically for storage, and the remaining 15 is related to the PPA and helping us work with specifically the public schools that have put solar on their roofs, and helping them create dashboards that allow the teachers to leverage that solar in terms of the curriculum that they're teaching. Moving on, if you look at research and development, we are proposing an increase of $154,000. This is to support the ongoing work for environmental infrastructure as we're currently building that out. That we're taking basically the money that we had set aside for that director and that we're not hiring, and we're just moving that over to research and development to use with consultants and other resources that are needed to help stand those programs. Moving on, we're looking at an additional $90,000 in consulting expenses. This is primarily driven by the storage. One of the tasks given to us by Pura was to help them think through front of the meter storage. The Energy Storage Solutions program is targeted at behind the meter storage, but in the ruling, they tasked the Green Bank with helping identify, build up the benefit cost analyses of front of the meter and more of what does the marketplace need in terms of being ready, and how do they think about front of the meter. And so this is primarily to go to bringing somebody on to support that. Well, I think that staff have a lot of good ideas on their own. I think that we are looking for somebody primarily to assist with the modeling around this. So moving on, we're looking at an additional $120,000 or $130,000 in office expense. This is primarily driven by commitment fees related to the Shrek warehouse. So we have borrowing facilities that we put in place that basically hold us over as we're preparing to securitize the Shreks as we do every year. And those have commitment fees, which were not included in the original budget. And then also in that there's a slight increase in computer and other expenses, which is reflective of a higher cost of technology due to supply chain issues. And so we're just updating that number as well. Moving down, I want to highlight under financial incentives and grants. These are the remaining two items. The first is $80,000. That represents a $60,000 going to the incentive programs and specifically related to customer acquisition for storage. So we're looking at working with two specific organizations that can help us first reach out to low-income residents. So we're looking at partnering with Operation Fuel. And so this would be to support their work in that channel. And then the other is related to another organization we're talking to about doing demonstration projects in the multifamily space. The remaining $20,000 is related to kind of how we think about and how we're actually putting out the sustainable CT grant that was put out in the original budget. And then finally, we have $1.1 million in here in battery storage incentives. And this is effectively the incentives that we're offering under the Energy Storage Solutions Program. And with that, I believe those are all of the budget items that, or changes that I have down between the two versions. The other thing I'd like to mention is with regard to our strategic partners, and these are the organizations and vendors where we come to the B&O committee and then onto the board, where we're looking for you guys to instruct staff and to engage with them. And this is primarily due to the dollar amount in these contracts. These are generally quite large. And so we typically don't amend those mid-year because we haven't had the need to, but because we are making such adjustments with storage, we do find ourselves impacted in terms of strategic partners. And so we're looking for a recommendation to the board that would allow us to add Craftsman Technology Group to that list. Craftsman is our Salesforce developer, and they have been an integral part of helping us build the enrollment platform for storage. And Guidehouse, who you've heard us mention on this call previously, but they've been a great resource in terms of helping us model benefit cost analyses as we applied for or submitted to Pura to be an administrator of storage. And now we completed a competitive RFP and selected Guidehouse to be the EM&D partner for us in the EDCs for energy storage solutions. So we need to increase that not to exceed threshold. And then finally, Stark Raving, who is our marketing and media agency. We're looking to increase that to cover the additional costs of marketing energy storage solutions. So with that, what questions do you have?
I don't have a question, but I want to thank you for putting this together. I know it's quite a task to work with these numbers, so thank you for the very thorough explanation.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Adrian speaking. I did want to go back to the battery storage incentives, to whom they go, and how many different projects do you think you can serve with that budget?
So we expect to serve 202 projects with those incentives. And that, I say that because we base this budget number off of the target that we set.
Yeah.
So the way that the incentive structure works for battery storage is there both an upfront incentive to decrease the installation cost of the battery, and then a performance-based incentive that is awarded to the homeowner where the battery is situated, based, or to the TPO who owns the battery, based off of when that battery is dispatched. And the upfront incentive is what the Green Bank administers. The performance-based incentive is overseen and administered by the EDCs. So this is 100% of the upfront incentives for those 202 systems. We're expecting the vast majority of those to be residential systems. And I think that we have fairly modest goals from a commercial perspective. Sorry, I'm just trying to open up the breakdown in my spreadsheet. Bear with me 1 second. So
Yeah, while Eric is pulling that up, just kind of an interesting thing going forward is that as we're the energy storage solutions co-program administrator with the utilities, is in the past on the residential solar front, we've been focused only on residential. Now we actually have a non-residential component as well. So it's going to be interesting from our organizational administration perspective, because we haven't had, at least in the last decade, an administration of a non-residential program. So you could imagine there might be some large projects out there that come in that would require, you know, $1 million approval of incentives because they're large, right? So where they cross those thresholds, you know, Eric and team Sergio too, we're going to have to follow our operating procedures for, you know, staff approvals under 500 above, you know. So it'll be interesting to see how the market responds to the larger systems on non-commercial.
Right. So we're expecting 200 of these projects to be residential and 2 of these to be C&I storage. The split of, in terms of size, is I think we're expecting about 1.5 megawatts of capacity on the residential side and 1 megawatt on the C&I side. So applying that same ratio to this, let's call it 60% of that 1.1 million would go to homeowners, and the remaining 40% would be for larger C&I projects. Does that sound about right? I think Sergio's on the line.
Yes, Eric, that's accurate.
Cool.
Thanks, Eric.
And all right, what else can I tell this group about the budget and targets?
Maybe the only thing I would add, Eric, just to be clear on the environmental infrastructure, what's happening with the personnel. You know, the board approved of a director level position for environmental infrastructure. The initial plan was to come to the board with a position description at the October board meeting last year. That didn't happen. You know, we were ambitious with that date. We had set an offsite strategic retreat for November. We had to reschedule that given the Delta variant. We moved it to February. That was good because it gave Ashley and I more time to dig into land conservation and parks and recreation. So, you know, in devising that position description, we wouldn't have had enough you know, information to be able to do a good enough job trying to figure out what we need. So I'm confident that land conservation and parks and recreation is in a good spot. We've now had to move the strategic retreat from February to the end of April, which I also think is a good thing, because now that gives Ashley and I more time to work through agriculture, water, waste, and recycling. So I think going into that late April offsite strategic retreat, that we're going to be able to bring a lot of findings into that meeting that will then help us, coming out of that meeting, figure out what we want to hire for this position. So I would imagine that we'll come back probably at the June meeting, if not the July meeting, with the Director of Infrastructure Program position description for your review and approval. So what we've effectively done here is to say, let's move the salary out and benefits out, and to the extent we need additional resources for the technical support, you know, more time with Ashley, more time with the technical facilitators that are helping us with resilience. You know, I don't anticipate we're going to spend that entire budget, but we now have resources that are going to be able to help us kind of understand and wrap up some of those findings that are going to allow us to go into that April offsite strategic retreat in a really good spot.
And just one other thing for the group that just relative to what we did done in previous years, oftentimes at this meeting, we'll look to do an update of our comprehensive plan to be reflective of the targets and anything else going on. In light of Brian's work on environmental infrastructure, we'll actually look to make those changes to the comprehensive plan sometime this summer. So with that, are there other questions on the budget? So with that, I don't know, John, do you want to see if there's a motion for this resolution?
This is Binu. So moved.
This is Lonnie, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
I actually abstain. This is Brenda. Due to the relationship with the Green Bank and Operation Fuel regarding the battery storage project.
Makes sense. All right. So that's all I had on the agenda for today.
Oh, darn. Well, unless we've got anything else, do people have any parting comments, or otherwise a motion to adjourn would be in order?
This is
Okay,
Lonnie, so
here-
moved.
Was
Second.
that a motion?
Yeah, from
And a
Lonnie.
second? Okay, and so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Brian. We got a whole lot of educating today on, and as somebody said, these were good mistakes, but I'm glad that you caught them. So with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You.
Aye.
Bye.